Hi, I'm Emily Chang. I'm the CEO of McCann Worldgroup in China and the author of the book, The Spare Room. Tune into this episode to hear why it's important as a leader to define what really pisses you off. Listen to the 100-Year-Old Mind Hack from Scott Fitzgerald. Oh, and learn about the Aramaic root of a very important word, which Dove just happened to know off the top of his head.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. As a leader today, if you've not considered what your legacy is, or at least what it could be, you are going to find it very hard to lead millennials, and you're going to find it pretty much impossible to lead Gen Z. That being said, you're busy. You've got deadlines, you've got shareholder meetings, and everyone is pulling at you in every possible way. So how can you find out what your legacy as a human is, and moreover, what is your legacy as a leader? Well, that's where we're going on our next 2 episodes, so stay tuned. As always, we need your help in staying relevant, so please get yourself over to wherever it is that you tune in to our show from, and do us a favor, rate, review, and subscribe. Always helps. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. By the way, in case you're curious, I'm Dov Baron, and I am your host, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. If you're curious to know more, go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. All right, our guest today for the next 2 episodes actually is Emily Chang. Emily Chang is the CEO of McCann Worldgroup, one of the big 4 global marketing firms with an integrated network of advertising agencies in over 120 countries. Emily is a seasoned executive who has worked with some of the world's most renowned companies, including Procter Gamble, Apple, and Starbucks. Over the last 22 years, her job has brought her and her family to 8 different homes across the US and China. And everywhere that she has lived, Emily has found herself at this unique intersection of what she terms as her offer and her offense. Offer and offense. We'll talk a lot more about that in this show. Life has served up young people who have been abused, neglected, and marginalized to find sanctuary in her spare room. Among her deeply personal accounts Emily shares in this book, some of the stories are truly heart-wrenching. They're about emotionally abused kids who, like child bride, rescuing a dying baby, dealing with an abused daughter of a local prostitute. With 16 young people she and her family have cared for, Emily has found that living into her social legacy has not only deeply enriched her own life and her home life, but it has enabled her to become a more authentic and relatable leader in the workplace. The depth of these stories are covered in the long form and really, truly heart-wrenching ways and truly deeply inspiring ways in an interview that Emily did with us on our other podcast called Curiosity Bites. And you can, of course, go over there and hear more about it after you've listened to this, and I'm sure you'll be inspired to do so. Because now more than ever, social purpose has become an urgent leadership imperative. In her latest book, The Spare Room, Emily will help you to identify your social legacy and live a more intentional life and lead with authentic purpose. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome the extraordinary, the marvelous the legacy living Emily Chang. Good to have you, Emily. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Dove.
Always a pleasure to chat with you. I really do appreciate it. And I'm really looking forward to getting into the show because your life is an extraordinary one. It's making an extraordinary difference. But where I always like to start the show is in the context of leadership development. What is the most frustrating thing that you see that seems glaringly obvious to you, but gets ignored or even dismissed by others? You know, you're at that cutting edge in leadership. You're out in front of a global organization. What are we missing, Emily? Tell us what we're not paying attention to that we should.
Maybe it's not frustrating, but maybe underrated, I'd say,
Sure.
is two things come to mind in terms of how we set people up for success when they get promoted. One thing I think we don't teach is how to delegate. People who get promoted are outstanding individual contributors. They do a great job by managing their own workload very carefully, probably by being to some degree controlling, and then suddenly they're put in charge of people. And what sets them up for success as a people manager is no longer individually managing my work, doing it, delivering it, executing. It's actually figuring out how to delegate, finding the right person to do the right work, and encouraging them in the right way. And I don't think that's something that's actively trained per se.
So that makes sense that we're promoting people for their individual contribution so it becomes a Peter principle. We're promoting people to the level of their incompetence. They're really good at what they do, and then we put them into an incompetent position because they're going to try and do what they've done.
So proactively, exactly to that point, how do we pivot and help them understand you are getting promoted for having done a great job in this role? Now, what's going to set you up for success in the next role requires a different set of skills. Let me give you the coaching and development to develop those skills. And I want you to start practicing them because, again, the behaviors that got you where you are going to be different for the behaviors that will get you where you're going.
Yeah, that's a really key point. Thank you. That's really succinct, beautiful. Now, you know, in the introduction, I talked about not only you, but intentional leadership and why that is so important today. If you were able to use just 3 words to define your life intention, what would it be? What would those be?
It would be comfort for the spirit. That's 4 words.
Comfort for the spirit. Okay. Tell us what that means.
So this concept of social legacy, right? Trying to define the intersection between your offer and your offense. That's sort of the construct behind the book that I wrote. Your social legacy is simply this. Your legacy is leaving something better than you found it. Social defines the space in which you seek to make that impact. As we were defining our own social legacy as a family, and then for me as an individual, we came upon this word. It's a Korean word. It's called kibun. And it was introduced to us by one of the young people living in our home. And his translation for it roughly is comfort for the spirit. And to me, what that means is when you come into my home, your spirit feels comfortable. You feel such a deep sense of belonging. You can take a deep breath and feel that you can be exactly who you are. And you're fully seen, heard, respected, and valued for that. And not just in the home, but also in the workplace. So to me, that's a congruency that's really important. Who I want to be known for as a leader in my home, as a leader in the workplace, hopefully as a leader in the world, is I want you to feel a comfort for the spirit when you're around me, that you have a deep sense of belonging, and I fully accept you and want to help develop you to be successful exactly for who you are.
So, Emily, just to sort of come at that for a moment, because I fully agree with you. I think it's beautiful, and I want to encourage that. But let's go to the other side, which is the pushback, which is what I talked about in the beginning. Well, I've got deadlines, and I've got stakeholder meetings, and I've got shareholder meetings, and I've got team to manage, and you want me to create comfort for the spirit of everybody. Come on, that's just not realistic. I don't agree, but I'm interested to what your
Yeah.
pushback, what your answer to that pushback is.
Great question. I think comfort, let's not confuse that with lax or easy.
Hmm.
I'm not a lax and I'm not an easy leader. I think the people who work in my organization will agree with that. Comfort for the spirit means my spirit feels comfortable here. That means I know I am accepted. Now I'm
Hmm.
going to be pushed to do great work, and I'm going to be held accountable to deliver on my KPIs, on deadlines. But what I know is if I need Emily to break through barriers, she will go do that. She might charge ahead, so I need to use that with discretion. If I'm working a late night and I don't think I'm going to be able to make it happen, and there are crazy expectations by a client, I also know that she will come in late or come in on a weekend and sit alongside me and help me. And if there's a moment where I get to go on stage or where I get to shine or be submitted for an award, I also know that she's going to be behind me, pushing me under the spotlight. So comfort is not a relaxed, imagining somebody lying, flaccid on a couch. It simply means I know you've got my back and I know you're here for my success because you believe in who I am.
And I get that, but I'm talking about from the place of being the leader. How do we, as leaders, how do we have this understanding of how to, uh, like, it feels like we got to take another course. It feels like we've got to do another thing. Like it's another thing added to the list of the things I've got to do as the leader. And now I've got to make them comfortable, make their spirit comfortable. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, I'm not saying that anybody else should have this leadership principle or style. I think everybody's got their own style. That's mine.
Sure.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. And that's something that's important to me. And it's the way I like to engage with people. And as I'm hiring, that's what I'm looking for, is somebody who wants to bring their whole self to work, somebody who wants to know that I've got their back and I'm fully engaged with them. That may not be the kind of leader you want. So you have to find the leader that resonates with your style and what you want out of your job. And then the leader has to identify what works for them. So I'm definitely not prescribing comfort for the spirit for anyone else. I'm answering your question, which is how would I define my own?
Yeah. And, but I just think, you're on here and, I'm honored to have you as a guest because you are an outstanding leader. And I think that the people we interview are very often these great examples and people want that. They want to see what that example is like.
Mhm, mhm,
But oftentimes I think that people think, well, I'm not that,
mhm.
or I can't be that. And I think oftentimes we underestimate what we're capable of. And you have certainly shown that in your leadership. And I have the advantage of knowing a little more than the listener maybe at this point. And that's why I encourage them to go listen to your fabulous interview on Curiosity Bites. So let's take it into a little bit further. Um, you and I believe anyway. You and I believe that everyone is designed to do something extraordinary with their life. I don't think it is our nature to be passive in life. I think we are supposed to be active in life, and there is something extraordinary that we can all do. Tell us why you decided to write the book and what you hoped would happen as a result. And by the way, if you don't know the name of the book, I'll restate it, which is The Spare Room. And if you're watching this on, of course, on YouTube, you can see it behind Emily over there.
Thank you. The reason I wrote the book, it's been an evolution. It started off
Mhm.
because we had these incredible front row seats to some amazing stories of watching young people transform, of watching emotional renewal, spiritual healing, and frankly, even sort of medical miracles of some real physical limitations that just overcame insane odds, and
Mhm.
every doctor's expectation. So we wanted to share some of these stories because we found them so inspiring. And the people who share life with us would often meet these kids and they'd say, how is this even possible? Or the other question they would ask is, how do you have time to take care of these kids? And the thing that always struck me was, we are the ones who get blessed in this whole experience, right? We're the ones who get to experience something so enriching to our own lives as a family and for me as an individual. And then eventually it became, okay, it's great to tell these stories, but how do you actually encourage people when they read it? They'll want to say, just like you said in the introduction, I want to do more. I want to live an extraordinary life. How do I get started? So then we added a series of self-reflection exercises at the end of every chapter so that when you close the book, you not only can say, wow, those are some amazing stories, but I also know my own. I know my offer. I know my offense. I know my social legacy. I know what I want to go do about it. There's an action plan. And I've even identified a tribe that will hold me accountable and work with me to achieve these goals I've now set for myself. So that's really what it became. And then last but not least, when we signed up with a publisher, she said, it'd be great to include other stories as well, not just your own, because one person, it's easy to say, well, that's just that person.
Right.
And I'm so glad she pushed me because I interviewed maybe 30 or 40 people and picked another 15 stories, all levels, all industries, all walks of life. Everything from, the lead singer of Cirque du Soleil to a junior physical therapist to somebody who was in Afghanistan in the military. And you start realizing more and more, I say with deep conviction now that I probably didn't when I started this exploratory, everybody truly can do something so extraordinary. I think when they lead into life with intention, and when they want to embrace the power of words and clearly articulate their purpose, because it becomes so clarifying. Now I know what I want to do. I know this is what I have to offer. I know what I want to direct my energy at, and I know what a successful outcome will be. So I'm living life essentially the way I do work, which is I set a plan, I set a goal, and I establish milestones that take me down that path.
The name of the book is The Spare Room. So let's just put that in context for people. So tell us what the spare room is, because people might be thinking, okay, is this an Airbnb thing? Like, you rent out your spare room, and so because in the second half of the show, I want to talk about what it means in the context of leadership and those that follow us or that are loyal to us. But let's talk about what does the spare room actually mean?
So it's a euphemism for what you have to offer. And I'll tell you, Dov, it's kind of evolved, right? So your first question was, how do you define your leadership? And I said, comfort for the spirit.
Right.
I would say when I started this book, I thought my social legacy was the spare room. And as I started unpacking and doing my own self-reflective exercises, I started to realize the spare room is a space. Everybody's got something to offer. It might be an asset like a space, a garage. It might be time, money. It could be your unique experiences, the languages you speak, your carpentry. Defining what that thing is, what is your spare room, is actually only half of the formula. So bad on me that I didn't identify that, because the other half of the formula is your offense. And that is defining what it is you want to leverage your space to go after, your space, your resource, your history, your passion. And for me, that has become babies and vulnerable young people who've been marginalized or taken advantage of in life or abused, to your point. And how can we leverage our spare room to create, again, that middle space, which is a comfort for their spirit, a safe place for them to heal, for them to rest, for them to transform. Some people just need that little space. Some people need a loving family around them. They don't have it in their own home. And so for me, what I wanted to encourage everybody was find your own spare room, find your offer. But the other half of it is define your offense. And when you find the intersection between those things, that's when you can really unlock what I would call sort of your purpose. And under the spare room, there's a very unsexy subtitle. I decided to just say it like it was versus finding fluffy words. It's about, and this might lead to the second half of this podcast, defining your social legacy allows you to lead with authentic purpose and live a more intentional life. And that's the piece that I started to find really what I was doing in my spare room in my home had always been separate from my professional life. But when a friend encouraged me to tell people at work or bring the kids to work more proactively, I started to realize it actually makes me more effective as a leader.
Yeah, and we definitely want to get into that in the second part, because I just think that that's so vitally important for people to actually grasp. But as we come towards the end of this part, I want people to understand this offer and defense thing, because it's, you know, when you talked about it with me before, I thought, what a beautiful way to put it. Like it so gives people something to actually hook into and say, oh, now I get it. Because I
Mm,
think that when you say, well, what's your purpose or what's your legacy? It's like, it's fluffy and nebulous, or it's too big. And I don't have time for that. Whereas
right.
you gave it into such a powerful, succinct way. So help us to understand that.
Well, it's about frameworks, isn't it? So if we're listening to this podcast, we care about leadership and
Hmm.
inspiring followership and loyalty. And that always comes with some sort of a framework. What is the model that works for us? Not because we want to constrain ourselves or rigidly define, but rather we want to create a space in which we have
Yes.
freedom within that framework.
Right.
So when we talk purpose, when we talk these overarching ideas, they can become larger than life. They can become overwhelming, intimidating, or frankly, they
Hmm.
can lack the specificity that
Yes.
drives action.
Hmm.
So the other thing that occurred to me is there are so many issues in the world. You know, we're coming on, as we record this, the World Day for Social Justice. We look at the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. My gosh, they're all meaningful, and there are 17, and
Yeah.
each one can unpack into 1,000 specific needs. So where do I focus? Instead of running fundraisers, trying to convince people that my cause is the thing, or I am by no means trying to convince people, open your spare room to strangers. Of course not, because that's my thing. But what I feel with this model, to your question, is you find your own thing. By
Mm.
identifying your offer, you're empowering yourself to say, I do have something unique to offer the world. This is the combination of who I am and what I bring to the table. That's empowering and that's liberating in a lot of ways. And then on the other hand, to say, I know my offense. I know that thing, you know, and I've brought this model into the workplace. Maybe it's not offense, maybe it's opportunity in that way. So what is my offer against which offense or against which opportunity? And how I define that space, the more specific I can be, the more I can meaningfully unpack that intersection between the two of them. And then I know mine. Mine is this idea of comfort for the spirit. I really want to create a space of belonging. That's what I do well. I'm not going to convince anyone else to do it, but oh my God, when I find somebody else who has a similar mindset, we become an instant tribe. And I
Yes.
think that's a different model, which is I'm not trying to convince you to come to my fundraiser. I'm not trying to tell you how important my cause is, but I know my thing. And when I find other like-minded people who equally know their thing, there's an amplification power there.
So to use my language, not yours, but to use my language, your offer is what you have as resources, whether that is literally a physical spare room, whether that is your creativity or your time or your ability to make
Yeah.
sandwiches or whatever it is, right? Whatever you have in your back pocket, but your offenses, again, my language, not yours,
Yeah.
is that you look out in the world and kind of pisses you off a little bit. It's the thing that upsets you, that you're like, what, you know, and my language around it is, you would be thinking to yourself, why hasn't somebody done something about this? And
Exactly.
the somebody you're asking is you. That's the
Yeah.
you. It's like, well, why can't I be that person who does something about it? And I think that is like putting those two things as with each other is so good, because I think oftentimes people go, I've got all these great things I could do, but you know, I don't know if it's useful, or I'm really upset about this, but I don't have the resources. And what you lay out in the book beautifully is we all have those things, and then and this is a formula for bringing them together in leadership and in life.
Your words are perfectly said. I was just flipping, each chapter kind of lays out this model. It's very direct, right? Chapter 1, offer. Chapter 2, offense. And at the end of chapter 2, I wrote this: consider your reaction as you read through these specific potential offenses. Some lines may resonate. Yes, that's always been something that's bothered me. Others may bring back a memory from the past. I used to be involved in that. So I actually ask people to place a check in the box next to the statements that stand out for them. And it
Right.
starts off with those 17 SDGs. I think exactly to your point, when you can't stop yourself from wondering why isn't somebody doing something about that, it's probably because it's something that's calling to you, and maybe you can, and maybe you
Yeah,
should.
that's wonderful. So we are already at the end of part one of our delicious conversation. We will come back into part two, and we'll talk about how this applies directly into leadership and, of course, into loyalty, what that actually means for you as a leader as you listen to this, as you look at what your social legacy is. But before we go, before we go into part two, rather, please tell our audience where they can find out more about you and all your wonderful resources and how they can reach out and, of course, grab the book and all those things.
Sure. The website is www.social-legacy.com. And as Dov very thoughtfully noticed before this show, we've updated the socials a little bit. So on Facebook and Instagram, it's simply Emily Chang.
Fabulous. So we will, of course, make sure that those are posted in the show notes. We'll make sure that you have all the social links and all the ways to find out about the book and all those things. We'll even put a short link into to make sure that you can grab the book on Amazon. It's a fabulous book. I highly recommend it, and you're going to get a lot of value out of it. We are going to be back in part two of this delicious conversation with Emily. And till then, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about your social legacy and what you can bring that offends you and how you can bring your offer to it. We'll be back in one click. See you soon. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.